There could be up to 250,000 more flats with flammable cladding across the UK than previously thought. The National Audit Office says that potentially more than 7,000 affected tower blocks haven't been identified and subjected to repair schemes. The government says it's formulating a plan to speed up cladding removal. But Richard Moore from the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign is angry about the way the crisis has been handled.
The idea that twice as many people just makes me angry, to be honest. And if you needed evidence, these figures support that evidence. It's a national scandal that is not getting the attention it deserves.
14 minutes past 6. A National Audit Office report published today is raising the alarm about the number of buildings in England that still have dangerous cladding on them 7 years on from the Grenfell fire, and also about how long it will take to remove it all. Phil Hendry, BBC reporter, has done a lot of work on the cladding crisis. One of the striking things about this report, Phil, is the difference between the number of buildings already identified as having this cladding on them and the number the NAO think are affected.
Yes, indeed. It will probably come as quite a surprise to listeners that the number is so large. So currently in the government schemes that that taxpayers' money is being used to help fix, there's nearly 5,000 individual blocks of flats. But the NAO, for the first time, has published the Ministry of Housing's own internal estimate. Now, this has never been made public before for a number of reasons, which suggests that there could be in total up to 12,000 blocks of flats that have flammable cladding on them. Now, that's an additional 7,000 buildings. Potentially, that's around 250,000 flats across Britain that could still have flammable cladding that is yet to be identified.
And that, of course, will have implications for the cost of fixing it all. But the NAO report also has some really worrying details in it about how hard it is even to identify which material has been used on a particular building.
Yes, indeed. The Ministry of Housing has known this for a while, and this has obviously been made public by the report. It essentially comes down to the complexity of ownership. Listeners will be aware that many flats in this country are leasehold, therefore they're owned by a freeholder. In many cases, those freeholders are difficult to trace. When we're looking, when the Ministry of Housing is looking for who is responsible for all this, from the freeholder, they're also looking for who the developer is. Now, very often, the developers may have ceased trading, or indeed, once they've finished building the flats, they sell the freehold on to somebody. So there's a whole complex web, which is partly the result of the leasehold system in England and Wales, that it makes it very difficult to trace who's actually responsible. And if you have a developer and a freeholder involved in this, there's a blame game that can go on as to who should actually take responsibility for fixing the building.
We'll look at how this affects social housing in particular in another hour's time. Phil Hendry, thank you. All is not well with the process of removing dangerous cladding from buildings. Anyone who lives in one will tell you that, despite it being 7 years on from the Grenfell fire. But the National Audit Office has a stark report out on the subject today, pointing out that as many as 12,000 buildings in England could be affected, and also the immense complexity of even pinpointing which they are and who is responsible. There are complex ownership structures, they say. Trying to trace the developers is hard. Sometimes freeholds have been sold on. Sometimes building materials are different to what was listed. Ruth Davison is Chief Executive of the Islington and Shoreditch Housing Association. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
How many properties within the association that you own are in this category of 11 metres or higher?
So we're a really small association, but if you build homes in London, land prices are such that you build tall buildings. And for us, we've got 82 buildings above 11 metres. But unlike, this report is about access to public funds to make homes safe. We are clear what buildings we have responsibility for. But unlike the private sector, the social housing sector cannot access taxpayers' money to make the homes of social renters safe.
But that should be a last resort. You should in the first place be chasing the developers, right?
We should be in the first place chasing the developers. So the last government who made the rules around access to the scheme had a pledge that you would be able to call on to remediate homes that they got big developers to sign. They said that they would have a second pledge for smaller kind of SME builders. They never put that in place. So if you're a small and medium-sized association such as ours, there are builders who never signed a pledge with the government to make homes safe.
So you would have used the smaller and medium-sized builders
yes,
generally?
Of course. Yeah, no, we only own about 2,500 homes. And there are associations of our size in London and elsewhere where we have no access to developers to make the homes safe, and we've got no access to a government fund. And when I tell people that the only people who are barred from accessing government funds are social renters with a social landlord, the very people impacted by the Grenfell fire, they're incredulous. They don't believe it because it's so manifestly unjust.
But just explain exactly what's happening. So when you approach the builders who've built your housing blocks, your housing association towers, they say, sorry, we're not committed to, we're not required to be part of this, so you're on your own.
So a couple of developers were ashamed by the state of the blocks that they'd handed to us, and they stepped forward and they put them right. Others we have had to drag kicking and screaming at the risk of litigation to make those buildings safe. But there are some who don't exist anymore. So we have one building where the developer went bankrupt, and it's not far from my home. It looks like a single building. We have 36 homes inside the bit that we own. The other bit has been owner-occupied since the day it was built. Those people have full access to government funds to make their buildings safe, and we have none. We've just had to spend...
In that building, are you saying the cladding is being removed and one half of the building is being made safe?
No, both halves of the building are being made safe.
But you're paying.
But we've had to pay £2.8 million plus VAT. Don't even get me started on why we have to pay VAT, as it's like rubbing salt into the wounds. But, we're a small association. We've existed for 90 years. And our board took the really difficult decision just a couple of years ago to start selling social homes in London to fund making homes safe that we had paid for once and that were inspected by independent people. It's like going to a car garage, buying a brand new car, being really, really, really precautious and taking a car engineer to check, only to find later that the brakes are faulty, the hazard warning lights are not there, and we are having to pick up the tab. The government now could act to change the rules and allow us access to those funds, and that would be a more appropriate thing to do. And actually institute that polluter pays principle, which the last government said that they would, start a levy.
Ruth Davison from the Islington and Shoreditch Housing Association, thank you.
Thank you very much.